Okay, here's the project for my Gasoline remix, and here are the vocals. The orange ones are the guitars that were recorded in, and these blue ones are the percussion. These are the drums. These yellow ones are the electric piano, and this blue one is the bass, and the rest of them at the bottom, the green ones, are the synths. It's at 120 BPM. I'm gonna turn on the loudness meter. Yep. And let's have a listen to this.
Are you insane? Like me? Are you insane? Like me? Are you insane like me? Been in pain like me? Bought $100 bottle of champagne like me? Just to pour that motherfucker down the drain like me? Would you use your water bill to dry the stain like me? Are you high enough without the Mary Jane like me? Do you tear yourself apart to entertain like me? Do the people whisper about you on the train like me? Saying that you shouldn't waste your pretty face like me. And all these people say you can't wake up, this is not a dream. You're part of a machine, you are not a human being. We should face all made up, living on a screen. Low on self-esteem, so you run on gasoline. I think there's a flaw in my code. These voices won't leave me alone. Oh, my heart is gold and my hands are gold. Oh, my heart is gold and my hands are gold. Are you deranged like me? Are you strange like me? Lighting matches just to swallow up the flame like me? Do you call yourself a fucking hurricane like me? Pointing fingers cause you never take the blame like me. And all these people say you can't wake up, this is not a dream. You're part of a machine, you are not a human being. We should face all made up, living on a screen. Low on self-esteem, so you run on gasoline. I think there's a flaw in my code. These voices won't leave me alone. Oh, my heart is gold and my hands are gold. Oh, my heart is gold and my hands are gold. Oh, my heart is gold and my hands are gold. Oh, my heart is gold and my hands are gold.
So that is the track. I'm going to get to this in a moment. I'm going to pause this, and I'm going to close this, and we'll get back to loudness later part of the track. Now, the first thing we want to look at is, let's look at the electric pianos. Now, this is the MIDI for that. It sounds like this. Right, and this is sort of the chord progression, and the second part of the chord progression goes like this. So this pattern is the thing that makes up basically the entire song. Sort of repeat bits, whether it's part A, which is this part, or part B, which is the second part. So it's sort of like a bit like a 12-bar blues kind of pattern. It repeats, 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 and this is kind of the B is sort of like the punchline. And I copied the exact same pattern throughout these pianos. Now let's look at the instruments. The first instrument is a really simple instrument. It's an electric piano, a vintage electric piano, and I picked the Electra piano preset, and I sent it to a bus. You can see here, bus 1. So you can create a bus send by going to bus 1. And I created a Space Designer here, which is under Reverb, Space Designer, Stereo. And I wanted a really big spacey sound. So I made large spaces, halls, Prince Hall 1, the chosen reverb. And I picked that one. I pulled the dry to 0 and the wet to just -8. And then I sent quite a generous sum. And yeah, so it sounds like that. So it's got this spacious sound. Now looking at the EQ that I have, I pulled down somewhere around 400 Hertz because it was a bit sort of boomy. So it thins it out a little bit. I think puts a little bit less body into the whole thing. And then, now if you listen to this, it's a different electric piano, and you can see that this one is panned to the right a bit, as opposed to this one's panned to the left a bit. So some slight widening there. And this one is also an electric piano, and I picked which preset did I pick? I think it's the default preset actually. I EQ'd it a little bit. Now I took more off at around almost 800 Hertz. Some of the boxiness, I took off all the low end, send it to bus 1 again. So now you get a wider piano. So it's always important that your left and your right pans are slightly different instruments, slightly different sounds, and when you combine them, you get some of the harmonics, the richness of it, and you get some of that width as well. Now underneath that, I have an alchemy patch that you can see here. It's called the Never Ending Universe. It's under Dark Drone. So I went looking for pads, and just have a listen without all the stuff. It sounds like this. So it's this really ambient thing. I took out a lot of low end because I just wanted it to give some air into the whole thing. Also, I put a Space Designer on. Also Prince Hall 1, very wet, 100%, 0%, just to keep it even more crazy space. And then I use a gain. Now, this is interesting because I use a gain because the track has automation. Now, once you've automated a track, so I sort of let it gradually come in and then gradually go out. Once you have automation, it's kind of tricky to sort of like push the track up and down. So I make it an easy way to do it is to just use the gain plugin, and then I push it to where I want it. And in this case, it's -12. So it's pretty quiet. So they work together to sort of like have a little ambient. You can hear the pad sort of disappearing at the end because of the automation, which is great. And right at the transition point, I put this little electro riser that you can find in under riser. And I found an electro riser. This is number 4, so it's this one. No, it's not this one. It seems like this one, is it? Let's have a quick listen. Oh, that's a dubstep riser. Sorry, electro riser is this one. Yep, it's right there. I like to add a little, I just dragged it in. I like to add a little bit of reverb so that it doesn't just die out. So I send it the same bus. So yeah, it's a bit of that. Also, yeah, here's where the sort of snare comes in. And the snare is this. Oh, sorry. The snare is this one. Hang on. Yeah, sorry. Got a bit confused there. Yeah, so the snare is this one. I looked into drums and percussion, single drum snares, acoustic snare D11. And that's the first one. I'm going to take all the processing out. And it sounds like this. Just a pretty straightforward kind of snare. Now, the thing is, I wanted it to be a little bit sort of shorter. So I mucked around with the output envelope. I put an enveloper. You can find them under Dynamics enveloper. And that's how I like to reduce sort of like the decay of a snare. So I mucked around with time a bit and the gain. You can see that there's a funky little curve there. You can see that's so much tighter without it. A lot of decay, and now it's much tighter. And then I put an EQ on, and I wanted it to be a bit livelier in certain parts. So here's how it sounds. Without. So it's a bit livelier, but I needed it to be even more livelier. So I added a EQ from the Vintage EQ collection, Vintage Tube EQ. It's nice to give it a little top end shine, and this is how it sounds with that. So I added some high boost over here. You can hear the brightness in it. It's not as bright, and when you put it in, yeah, so I needed that brightness, so I put that brightness in. And then from there, I put a compressor in. And in this case, I use a vintage op tool with a fairly sort of medium ratio of 5 or so. And the attack is just enough for the snare to sort of get the initial attack. Yeah, and the release is a fairly short release. Yeah, so you get a bit more punchiness in that snare, and that's kind of it.
Are you insane like me?
And next thing we do is the body kick, and the body kick is this under single drums kicks, layer kicks, body kick C1, 2. Now they all played on C1, that's why they named C1. So that's where the original sample lies. And here's without the EQ, here's how it sounds. This is a pretty, deep kick. And then I put an EQ on just to get rid of the high end, just to give that boom. Yeah. So we just want the thump for the body kick. And that's what we got. Now to combine it, there are actually 2 kicks here. So I'm going to take the processing off as well. This other kick, you can see under the same thing, single drums kicks, layer kicks, transient kick 12. Now let's listen to that. You can see that there's a clickiness associated with this. It's more of a transient thing, very little body. I didn't like too much clickiness, so I took out some of it through the EQ. Just have a listen. Yep. And I added a compressor as well, just to control it. And here's how it sounds. Yeah, so you get that body kick, that clicky part of the kick, and then you have the snare. Now the hats are coming from a sort of a drum kit under Drums and Percussion Electronic Drum Kits EXS 808. And these are just basically the toms and the hats. So it's this. So it's kind of rhythm. Let's listen to everything together. Nothing too fancy, and it's kind of replicated throughout the whole thing. And the electric piano as well, it kind of is replicated throughout. Let's have a listen. These two are kind of playing the same things. Now, the thing is, I have this and this. These are basically the two same tracks. I like to duplicate tracks. So this is the function to duplicate tracks. New track with duplicate settings. And then I can mix them differently. You can tell that this one is mixed at -5 and this one is at -11. So the levels are very different. Now this one are two different tracks as well. Although they're the same piano with the same EQ, they're also different mixes. This one is higher at -9 and this one is at -11. And you can tell that this one's softer, but it's for the higher bits. So it goes like that. So they kind of go together like this. So it adds a little bit of a high sheen on top of the sort of piano rhythmy bits. And now we have the bass. The bass is a really straightforward EXS under bass, electric bass, slapped electric bass. And you can see the MIDI is just going... Okay, it's a bit much for a slap bass and it's not exactly realistic. But I think the thing here is that I wanted to get a vibe. And I think it kind of works out with the drums and the bass. So yeah, it's not, like I say, the most realistic, but I think it captures the vibe and it captures the rhythm. I think the bass sort of like gives sort of the thump and the high bits add to the rhythm of it. So that's really important and I'm really happy with it. Yeah, and there's not many layers really. And then that's just the verse.
Are you insane like me? Been in pain.
And this is obviously Halsey's vocals. I didn't do very much at all. I just plonked the vocal track and then I added a reverb which is going to the same Space Designer as well, Prince Hall 1. And for the intro vocals, I did something a bit more interesting. Okay, let's take everything out. It's just going to be the vocals.
Are you insane?
Pretty straight up thing, but I took out all the low end so to make it a bit sort of boxier.
Are you insane?
Yeah, smaller, and then there's a stereo delay, just like this.
Are you insane?
And then I needed just one more thing, and that was an auto filter under stereo wide panel, and it gives that sort of left and right kind of feel.
Are you insane?
And then it goes to the right.
Like me.
Yeah, so that's a natural sort of like a preset panning thing. Yeah. And then there are some bits that start coming in, the rhythm bits. Now let's get to the guitars. These are actual recorded guitars. I played them. They're not very good, but they're good enough to add some rhythm and some feel to it. So this is how it sounds. What's more important here is to get the rhythm right. You know, there's a weird funky note. I just left it in at the start. I put two things in and I send it to the delay, which is bus 3, just a stereo delay. It's the basic default one. It's a noise gate and an EQ to bring up the particular frequencies that I want. Now with guitars, I think you need to EQ quite a bit, get rid of stuff you don't need, because guitars are fairly harmonically rich, especially slightly overdriven guitars, and then you can cut out the stuff that you don't want. The noise gate is because I wanted it to feel very rhythmic. Now let's take out the noise gate, have a listen. It's just a bit more messy, and this one gives it a bit more. Feels a bit more staccato-y because the threshold is, you know, at -14, which, so you just pull the threshold up and down and get the kind of vibe that you want. Together with the EQ, I think it kind of works out. And then there's a tambourine here as well. I can't remember if this is something I recorded. I think I did. And here's how it sounds. Yeah, I think it's a tambourine I recorded. Yeah, it's just really basic tambourine. I sent it to bus 1 as well, just to get a bit of reverb. And it's mixed really low. And you can see it's panned slightly to the right. So some of this rhythmic stuff, I like to pan a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, just to not have everything at center. And that's kind of the rhythm, which is supplemented by these ARPs here. Now I have an ES2 ARP. It's called Fuzzy Guy, and yeah, and I added a stereo delay to this, and it sounds like this. So that's the kind of pattern that's going on. The ARP works like this. It's a MIDI ARP, so you can go to your plugins and just pick Arpeggiator. It's a 1/16 upwards. Number 1 variation, just 1 octave. Pretty straightforward kind of ARP. Yeah, just to give it a bit more rhythm. And there's a stereo delay over here. Also, I think pretty much default, just me adjusting a couple of things. And yeah, that's what it is. Now let's look at automation. Doesn't really have much automation, only right at the end. Now for the extra rhythm, I added another ARP, and it's a 1/16 as well, going upwards, and this is my own rhythm under pattern. You can see that these are chords, and these are not chords. And when I play chords, here's how they sound. Now I picked this particular rhythm because it goes with the guitars and the synth. So here's how it sounds with the rhythm bit. Sounds a bit chaotic, and this particular synth is slightly sort of like detuned, but I think it adds a certain something to it. And just to let you know, it's an analog saw 3 oscillator. You can find it under tutorial settings, this one. I really like the sound because it's really rich. It's like a super saw. I put a flanger in, yeah, just muck around with it. And then some EQ, some just very, very little EQing just to get it to come out a little bit in the mix. So here's how it sounds with everything else. And this part here, I wanted to have a little bit of a sort of like a break. So I put an Alchemy synth. That sounds a bit like an electric piano on the keys as well, soft plucky synth. And then another electric piano, which is the same piano you get here. And they're just playing this high bit here, just like this. And this one's playing the same thing as well. So all these textures are just combining, which I think kind of works. And yeah, and you can see that the patterns are pretty much copied over, they go on, but there are different sort of like approaches to different sections. You can see the guitar bits are slightly different each time. There's one here that goes like this. And you can see it's pretty bright. You know, I sort of upped the brightness a little bit, and the tone itself is fairly bright. It's very unprocessed, and you can see my playing so bad that I had to sort of like pick all the different chords in different takes to put them together. Yeah, but it kind of works.
Now the people say you can't wake up.
It gives a bit more of that live feeling, that someone's there actually playing it. There's this other section where the guitar goes. Kind of like playing octaves, and yeah, and there's another sort of like ES2 simple sinker going here as well with an ARP. So it's doing similar things. If you can hear it, it sounds like this. So if you put them together, the rhythms are fairly similar. So they complement each other, and when you put them together with the arrangement, it kind of works out pretty well. They kind of like add a certain sort of different sections to it. So you can see that the basic drums are fairly similar, the piano bits are fairly similar. It's the stuff that surrounds it, little synths, little guitar lines, and they're all like slightly different.
Oh, my heart is gold in my head.
So you have this bit here. And this is the only time I kind of use something like a crash. I didn't want to use any crashes in this song. I used something called a falling star effect. So I was looking for like falling star effect number 3. It's like, oh, that's perfect. So I just dragged it in, sent it to reverb quite generously, and it kind of.
Are you deranged like me?
And I think it kind of works. The pads I copied over together with the automation. You can see it just copies over. And then you have your end section. Now the end section is fairly similar. You can see that these are copied over from here. And the addition of it is this conga rhythm. Really. And this conga rhythm kind of just goes like this. Now, it sounds a little bit out of place just by itself, but when you put it just quietly in the mix, it kind of adds to the rhythm. Yeah, and I think it kind of works to the credit of that. And then for the woes and stuff, I kind of use the same as the intro processing. You can see they're kind of the same, just at different levels. So when she sings whoa, it just goes to the flanging kind of feel.
In my code.
So most of the vocal sort of processing for this is just that chain, this particular chain, and they're all just different versions of the chain. Now the outro one is exactly the same as the intro outro vox thing. I just did a duplicate again, and I just lowered the levels for that and changed the EQ very slightly. So even like say these guitar lines, these two, they're actually the same track duplicated, and this one's just softer as well with a higher send, because I wanted the last chords to be kind of like very dreamy.
Gold in my hills are gold.
A bit dreamier than the one before. And the other thing is also I have this duplicated tambourine track from this one. And on the duplicate, you can see that there's automation of the volume, sort of like goes away. But not only the volume, I also do a send automation. So the send goes from this to like a full send, and it sort of becomes more ambient as it goes along. So if you have a listen, it kind of goes that way. So it makes it kind of sort of fade further into the background, and yeah, I think it kind of works quite nicely for the exits for this song. So I want to discuss about loudness as well. You can see on the mastering chain here, there are 3 processes. I'm gonna just pick this, the limiter, and the loudness meter. Now, you can see it from the earlier part of the song. I set this line here at -13, which is YouTube's loudness sort of requirement, which is an integrated number at around -13 or at -13. Now, the first part of the chain, let's go over the first part. It's a compressor. I use vintage opto just to catch a few of the peaks and to smoothen some of it out. A fairly low ratio of 3. And you can see it's not really catching like very, very crazy. So it's kind of catching just a little bit over here. And that's enough for me because it sounded good. I was trying all the different versions of this, and I like vintage opto the best for this particular track. And then I went on the limiter, and I added a gain of plus 5 and an output level of -1. Means I would limit everything at -1, so my true peaks stay at -1. And that's just kind of a recommendation for outputting your music to, say, YouTube or Spotify. -1 is always a bit of a safer level, so that you're not so close to digital clipping. And yeah, so that's all I did. I added +5 because I wanted to get an integrated number of about 30. And the way you measure it to use your LUFS meter is to play your whole track through from the start and press start and play it through. And you can see this number moving. And it will move up because this is a soft bit.
Are you insane like me? Been in pain like me?
So essentially, this number will climb or fall depending on the rises and falls in a whole song. So it's taking an average loudness of a whole song. Now in this case, it's very close to 13 as you saw earlier. So that's the level I found for this to be about -13, which means that the limiter had to be giving it about gain of about +5. The most important thing to do when it comes to these kind of things is to trust your ears and how you feel about a song. And as you do more and more, you'll just get a better feel for it. One thing I would recommend is to compare your song to different songs and to see if the mix is okay. Place them in the timeline, A/B them, and see if it's somewhere close to what you want. That's a simple way to do it.